"We saved you from embarrassing yourself," my father said, and 14 relatives at my aunt's Sunday lunch went quiet enough that I could hear the ice settle in the pitcher of sweet tea. 3 weeks before that meal, my parents had falsely reported my passport lost, invalidated the one I already had, intercepted the replacement notice, and cost me an $11,870 tuition deadline, a $1,600 housing deposit, and the graduate program I had spent 2 years earning. Then, one Tuesday morning, a woman from the passport office said 7 words that changed everything. We have the original call recording. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love seeing where you're all listening from. My name is Lauren Elizabeth Parker. I'm 25 years old now. Let me take you back to Columbus, Ohio in August of 2023. I had spent most of that summer moving through my days like someone trying not to disturb a tray full of glass. Everything felt balanced on something narrow. I worked 36 hours a week at Riverside Outpatient Rehab, mostly handling patient scheduling, insurance intake, and discharge paperwork. And every evening I came home to my one-bedroom apartment in Clintonville and opened my laptop at the same square oak table to work on forms, housing emails, immunization records, and loan documents for the master's program in Edinburgh that had accepted me in June. I had wanted that program since I was 22. Not in the dreamy, half-formed way people say they want things when they mean it would be nice. I mean, I had tracked admissions deadlines in a spreadsheet, I had saved sample personal statements. I had spent 2 winters taking an extra statistics prerequisite at night because my undergraduate transcript from Ohio State needed one more research methods credit. I had cut my grocery budget to $110 a month for 6 months so I could afford the application fees without asking anyone for help. My parents knew all of that because they liked to tell people I was the ambitious one when ambition was still harmless, when it sounded cute, when it could be mentioned over dinner like a personality trait instead of a plan. My mother, Denise Parker, told people I had always had my nose in a folder. My father, Richard Parker, would laugh and say, "Lauren can make a checklist for buying toothpaste." It was the kind of family teasing that looks affectionate from outside. It lands differently when you grow up inside it. There are jokes that are really just rehearsals for dismissal. That is what I had not learned yet. I was the younger of 2 daughters. My sister, Megan Parker Collins, was 29, lived in Grove City with her husband, Evan, and their son, Caleb, and had become so practiced at smoothing over my parents' behavior that she could do it before they even finished a sentence. She was not cruel in the way they were cruel. She was worse in some moments because she understood enough to know exactly what was happening and chose comfort over truth. If our mother snapped at me in front of people, Megan would press her lips together and change the subject. If my father made some needling joke about me being too sensitive, Megan would murmur, "He doesn't mean it like that." She had an almost athletic commitment to pretending gravity was optional. Still, there had been stretches of peace. I do not want to lie to you and make them monsters every hour of every day. Real families are not that tidy. My mother could buy exactly the right soup when I was sick. My father could fix a leaky sink in 40 minutes and never mention it again. Megan sent me gas money when I drove across the state to help after Caleb was born. Betrayal works because ordinary tenderness teaches you to lower your guard. If people were unbearable all the time, we would leave sooner. My acceptance email came on June 12th at 6:14 in the morning. I remember that because I had woken up early for no reason, reached for my phone in the blue pre-dawn light, and seen the subject line. I sat upright in bed so fast I scared myself. I read the first sentence 3 times before my brain would let me trust it. I had been offered a place in the MSc program in public health policy at the University of Edinburgh starting in September. I had to pay a tuition deposit of $11,870 by August 28th to secure the international student visa timeline and my reserved housing. I cried in a very quiet way because that is how I cry when something matters too much. I held the phone in both hands like it might slide away. The first person I called was not my mother. It was my supervisor, Alicia Ramos, because she had written one of my recommendation letters and because she was awake early enough to answer. Alicia was 41, wore dark scrub jackets over everything as if she did not trust office temperatures, and had a way of standing beside you instead of over you. She listened to me trying to speak through tears, then said, "Okay, breathe. Read me the deadline." She was always like that. Never dramatic, never invasive, Just the next right step. Later that morning, she brought me a plain blueberry muffin and set it on my desk without a speech. I have thought about that muffin more than once. Quiet people leave the deepest marks. My parents reacted the way I expected at first. My mother said, "Scotland? That is very far," in the soft tone she used when she wanted her concern to sound generous. My father said, "I thought graduate school here would make more sense financially." He was not wrong in a technical sense, but technical sense was often his favorite place to hide emotional control. At dinner the next Sunday, my Aunt Carol clapped both hands and said I was going to be all cultured and impossible by Christmas. My cousin Jenna asked what Edinburgh looked like. Megan smiled too brightly and said, "Well, if anyone can make a color-coded binder out of Europe, it's Lauren." People laughed. I laughed too. You do that sometimes to keep the peace while your stomach quietly tightens around a small, hard stone? The named older woman in our family orbit was not a grandmother, because both of mine were gone by then. She was my great aunt Evelyn Hart, my mother's aunt, 72 years old, silver hair cut into a practical bob, narrow wrists, low heels, and a voice that somehow managed to sound both dry and kind. Aunt Evelyn had once worked 30 years at the county clerk's office in Franklin County, and because of that, she regarded paperwork the way some people regard weather, not dramatic, just important enough to respect. She came to every major family meal with a folded handkerchief in her purse and peppermint candies no one ever saw her buy. If my mother was the kind of woman who controlled a room by filling it, Aunt Evelyn controlled one by noticing what everyone else pretended not to see. When I told Aunt Evelyn about Edinburgh, she looked at me over her glasses and asked, "Do you have your passport somewhere safe?" I laughed and said yes. She did not laugh back. "Good," she said. "Keep your own documents. Dreams make some people sentimental, and sentiment makes them careless with other people's lives." Then she reached across the table and touched my hand once, very lightly, as if sealing something private between us. At the time, I thought she was just being her usual exacting self. Later, I understood she had seen my family more clearly than I had allowed myself to. My passport was in a navy document folder in the top drawer of the small white dresser that had been mine since high school and was now sitting in my apartment bedroom because I had taken it when I moved out at 23. The folder held my birth certificate, social security card, immunization records, lease copies, and a stack of carefully printed emails from the university because I still trust paper in a way my generation is not supposed to. I kept the passport there because I had learned from years of living with subtle family intrusion that anything too visible became communal property in my parents' minds. They had house keys to my apartment for emergencies, left over from when I first moved and still wanted the illusion of support. My mother had used them twice to drop something off while I was at work. I had told myself that was normal. Women talk ourselves out of alarms because we are tired of being called difficult. That is how long it took me to ignore my own instincts. On August 5th, I went to my parents' house in Westerville for dinner because my mother texted that Megan and Caleb would be there, and because I had spent all week comparing visa timelines and needed one evening in a familiar kitchen with familiar noise. My parents lived in the same tan two-story colonial where I grew up. The front hall always smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old paper. The dining room had a polished cherry table my mother covered with placemats she ironed. There was comfort in that house, and there was history, and there was a constant undertow of being examined. My father asked practical questions about flights. My mother asked whether I had really considered the safety issue of living abroad alone. Megan asked whether I would date while I was there in the half-joking tone married sisters sometimes use to suggest your real life has not started yet. At one point my mother said, "You know, there is no shame in staying close to home. Not everybody is meant for grand exits." It was almost elegant in its cruelty. Nothing to object to outright, no blood on the floor, just enough to shrink a person's joy if she let it. Aunt Evelyn was there that night too, sitting at the end of the table with her napkin folded exactly in half. She lifted her water glass and said, "Travel is not a grand exit, Denise. Sometimes it is simply a beginning." My mother smiled in that tight way women smile when corrected by someone they cannot afford to offend. I saw it. Aunt Evelyn saw me seeing it. We said nothing. The next 2 weeks were a blur of logistics. I finalized my lease end date. I sold an old bookcase on Facebook Marketplace. I filled out vaccination forms and paid for a new set of passport photos because one of my visa applications needed a stricter background color than the photos I had used before. I had enough saved for the tuition deposit and housing fee between my own account, a small federal loan disbursement, and a scholarship from the program. The money was there. That matters. I want to make that plain. I was not asking my parents for money, permission, or rescue. My plan was funded. My documents were in order. I was moving. On August 19th, a Saturday, I met Alicia at Stoff's Coffee in German Village to go over a rough personal budget for the first semester. Alicia had a yellow legal pad, because of course she did. We sat by the window while rain needled the glass, and she helped me account for transit costs, food, phone service, and the possibility that I would need to replace a winter coat that actually understood Scotland. She did not ask probing family questions. She never did. But at one point she asked, "Do your parents know how real this is now?" I remember stirring my coffee and watching the foam collapse. "They know," I said. Alicia tilted her head slightly. Knowing isn't always the same as accepting. I wrote that down later in the Notes app on my phone. Some lines come into your life quietly and stay. On August 21st at 8:37 in the morning, while I was processing patient check-ins at work, I got an email from the university reminding admitted international students that any delay in visa preparation could threaten enrollment if deposits were not confirmed by August 28th. I remember the subject line because it made my pulse jump. During lunch, I checked the folder in my bedroom in my mind, almost like touching a sore tooth with your tongue. Passport, birth certificate, bank confirmation, everything ready. I had planned to submit the final tuition payment from my apartment that night, after one last exchange with the housing office. Instead, on August 22nd at 5:14 in the morning, my phone buzzed with an automated text from the airline app tied to my September 2nd flight. It told me there had been an issue verifying travel document status and asked me to contact customer support. I sat up in bed immediately. That kind of early morning fear has a physical taste, metallic, dry. The room was gray with dawn and my window AC hummed like distant machinery. I called the airline at 5:22, still in an old college t-shirt, hair tangled, one foot tucked under the other leg for warmth. The agent, a calm man named Terrence, asked me to verify my passport number. I read it to him from memory first, then went to the bedroom and pulled open the top drawer to confirm. The folder was gone. That is not the same thing as a document being missing. A document can slip under a stack of papers. A folder is a whole decision. I stood there with my hand still on the drawer handle, looking at the empty space where the navy edge should have been. I checked under sweaters, inside the nightstand, in the hall closet where I kept moving boxes, in the kitchen junk drawer, in the canvas tote by the couch. Then I called the airline back and explained I needed a minute. By 6:15, I had emptied half my apartment onto the floor and was shaking hard enough that my teeth clicked when I tried to drink water. I called my mother because panic has old habits. She answered on the third ring, sounding unusually awake. When I asked whether she had stopped by my apartment recently, she said, "Why would I do that?" Very quickly, too quickly, then followed with, "Lauren, are you sure you didn't misplace it? You get overwhelmed." There it was. The first move. Not concern, reframing. My father came on the line next and said, "Call the airline. Maybe it's a system issue." It was too neat, too available. Even then I felt it, though I did not want to. By 7:20, I was on hold with the National Passport Information Center from my car in the employee parking lot. Engine off, August heat already pressing against the windshield. The agent who finally answered asked for my name, date of birth, and current passport number. Then she paused. I heard keys clicking. She said very plainly, "Ma'am, this passport was reported lost on August 1st and is no longer valid." For 1 second, I thought she had the wrong file. I gave the number again. I gave my full name again. She repeated it, reported lost, invalidated, replacement processing initiated. There are moments when your body understands danger before your mind does. My scalp prickled, my hands went numb, then painfully hot. I asked who reported it. She said she could not provide everything over the phone, but confirmed a loss report had been made through the standard process. I said, "I never reported it lost." She told me I would need to submit a statement and begin emergency replacement steps. I remember looking through the windshield at my own reflection and thinking, very calmly, someone has touched my life. Someone has gone into it and moved things around. That was the morning the harm became visible. By noon, I knew I could not use my current passport, could not make my visa appointment without a valid one, and could not guarantee the university I would meet the timeline. By the end of the week, I would lose the housing deposit and be dropped from the intake sequence for that semester. My plan did not collapse in one dramatic explosion. It was worse than that. It unstitched. I worked the rest of that shift because I had no idea what else to do. My body moved on procedure. Co-pay signature here. Next appointment. At 3:10, Alicia stood in the doorway of my cubicle and looked at my face for about 2 seconds before saying, "Come with me." She walked me to the small records room in the back where it smelled like toner and cardboard, shut the door and handed me a bottle of water from the mini fridge. I told her what I knew. She did not gasp or say, "Oh my God," she asked. "Who had access to your apartment?" I said, "My parents." She nodded once and said, "Then stop calling them first. Start documenting." That is how the case began. I changed the locks on my apartment that same evening. The locksmith came at 6:45 and drilled out the old deadbolt while I stood barefoot on the kitchen tile because I had not even remembered to put shoes back on after work. Metal dust gathered on the threshold. The new lock clicked with a different sound, sharper, less forgiving. I asked the locksmith for an itemized receipt and wrote the time on the back with a pen from my junk drawer. 7:21 p.m. New deadbolt installed, $194. This is what I mean when I say I built the case calmly. Not because I was naturally serene, because panic wastes evidence. The next morning, August 23rd, I went to the police substation on Morse Road and filed a report for suspected theft of personal documents. The officer who took it was patient but unconvinced in the way officers often are when the crime sounds domestic and therefore somehow less real. He asked if I was sure I had not just misplaced the folder. I gave him the timeline. The passport had been reported lost on August 1st while the folder was still in my apartment and while I had not yet even scheduled the final visa appointment. My parents had keys, no one else did. He typed with 2 fingers and asked whether I wanted to name suspects. I said yes. Denise Parker and Richard Parker. He looked up briefly, then looked back down. Family names changed the air in a room. I did not care. I wanted a report number. I got one. From there, every hour had a shape. Work, calls, notes, screenshots. On August 24th, I went through my email and bank records to create a full timeline from admission to the invalidation notice. I printed the university deposit requirement. I printed the airline travel document alert. I printed my passport renewal instructions, housing invoice, and my own calendar screenshots showing when I had planned to pay. I called the apartment office where I lived and asked whether anyone had been buzzed into my building on days I was at work. The manager, a brisk woman named Tasha, said they did not release security footage without law enforcement, but confirmed there had been 2 visitor entries under my mother's phone number on July 29th and August 1st. She emailed that confirmation after I followed up in writing. Those dates went into the binder. I bought the binder at Staples because my old one already held school forms. It was white, 2 inches thick, and cost $6.29. I labeled sections with sticky tabs: timeline, university, passport, police, apartment access, family messages. This may sound cold to some people, but structure gives pain edges. It keeps it from soaking into everything. When I texted my parents to ask directly whether they had entered my apartment and taken my document folder, my mother replied within 4 minutes, "Lauren, enough. We did not steal from you. You are creating drama because this overseas fantasy is falling apart. My father sent, 'Do not accuse us of crimes' by text. I screenshotted both. Then, because villains escalate when they realize you are not collapsing the way they expected, my mother called my Aunt Carol and my sister Megan before noon. By dinner, I was getting messages from family members that all sounded oddly similar. Your mom says there has been a misunderstanding. Maybe slow down before making serious accusations. Your parents are heartbroken that you'd think this of them." The language was polished and familiar. Not denial exactly, concern as a weapon. Community pressure in Sunday clothes. I answered each message politely and almost identically. This is an active legal matter involving my passport. I am handling it through the proper channels. I did not explain further. Some people are not asking for information. They are asking whether you will return to your assigned role. Megan came by my apartment that Thursday evening unannounced. standing outside my new lock with a grocery store bouquet and her SUV still running at the curb. I nearly did not let her in, but she was my sister, and I wanted, in spite of all my better judgment, for one person in my family to step over to my side. She set the flowers on the counter and looked around as if my apartment had become a crime scene from a show she did not like. "Mom is beside herself," she said. I said, "Interesting choice of words." She ignored that. She told me our mother had only ever worried about me getting in over my head. She said maybe one of my neighbors had taken the folder. She said maybe I should stop using words like stole and fraud because once you say those, things get ugly. I asked her directly whether she knew my parents had gone into my apartment. She looked at the flowers. That was answer enough, but I waited. Finally, she said, "Mom asked me where you kept the passport a while ago. I thought she was just curious about whether you were organized." I remember the exact sensation in my chest. Not shock, confirmation. A cold kind of alignment. Pieces dropping into place with a hard click. "When?" I asked. Megan said early August, maybe the first week. Then she started crying, quietly and angrily at the same time, because she knew what she had just done. That was the beginning of her reckoning, not redemption, just the first crack. I did not comfort her. That may sound harsh, but there are moments when another person's tears are simply an attempt to redistribute consequences. I handed her a tissue box and said, "If anyone asks, do not lie for them again." She left 10 minutes later with the bouquet still on my counter. The flowers smelled too sweet and started browning by Sunday. Aunt Evelyn called me that night at 9:12. She never called late, so I knew it mattered. Her voice came through steady and almost formal. "Your mother says you are upset about travel paperwork," she said. "Would you like to tell me the truth instead?" I sat on my bed with the binder open around me and did. I gave her the whole outline, every date I had. She listened without interrupting except to ask for spellings and times. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, then said, "I was at dinner on August 5th when your mother asked your sister whether you still kept your important papers in the top dresser drawer. Megan said yes. I remember because it was an odd thing to ask, and because your father did not look surprised." My throat closed. Aunt Evelyn continued, "I did not understand what they intended then. I do now." Then she said the line I wrote down later and never forgot. "Truth can move slowly and still arrive on time." The first major institutional escalation came the next day. My program director in Edinburgh emailed me to say they had received a call from someone claiming to be a family member concerned that I was experiencing stress and might not be able to relocate safely. The caller had not asked for records, thank God, but had urged the university to reconsider whether I was in a condition to travel. My cheeks burned so hot reading that email I had to step away from my desk at work. They were not just trying to stop the move, they were trying to stain the explanation. If the paperwork delay did not hold, they wanted doubt to do the rest. My mother had used that word before. Overwhelmed. My father had used another. Practical. Between them, they were building a version of me who could not be trusted with her own life. I responded to the program director with a concise explanation that my passport had been fraudulently reported lost by an unauthorized party and that I was working with authorities and the State Department. I attached the police report number and asked that any further communication from third parties be documented. The director, Dr. Fiona Kearney, replied with more kindness than I had expected. She said the school could not delay beyond certain legal and visa thresholds, but they would note the interference. "Bureaucracies rarely love you. Sometimes they respect paperwork." That was enough. On August 26th, I called the passport office again and asked what information could be released regarding the false loss report. The representative explained that some details would require a formal inquiry, but she confirmed the report had been made by phone, not online, and that the caller had provided personal identifying information correctly. I asked whether the originating number was retained, she said, carefully, that law enforcement or a compliance investigator could request it. That was the first time I understood there might be a record more solid than my suspicion. A call, a timestamp, a phone number. The kind of thing even family stories cannot talk their way around. I contacted an attorney on Monday, August 28th, the day my tuition deposit was due. Her name was Patrice Holloway, and she had an office in Worthington above a bakery that made the whole stairwell smell like butter and cinnamon by 10 in the morning. Patrice was in her 50s, efficient without being cold, and had the gift of speaking about ugly things in plain language. She reviewed my timeline, looked at the text messages, the apartment visitor confirmation, the university email, and the police report. Then she folded her hands and said, "If they made that report knowingly, this is not family conflict. This is fraud and interference." Hearing another adult say that out loud changed something in me. Abuse depends on private language. Once it is named correctly, the room changes shape. The deposit deadline passed at midnight Columbus time, 5 a.m. in Edinburgh. I had all the money and no valid path to use it. I paid nothing because paying into a process I could no longer complete would have created a different disaster. At 8:20 the next morning I got the email. My place would be deferred only if the department approved an exception. Housing was released. My $1,600 deposit was non-refundable. My intake sequence for the visa cohort was closed. I read the message 3 times at my desk, then went to the employee restroom and sat in the last stall with my knees pulled up and my phone face down on my lap. That is how long it took them to erase a year of work. Less than a month. People imagine rage as hot. Mine was not. Mine became exact. Patrice sent a preservation letter to my parents by certified mail on August 29th, instructing them not to destroy any communications, travel documents, mail, keys, or electronic records related to me or my passport. She also sent requests to the passport agency and followed up with the police report information. My parents responded by retaining their own lawyer, a man named Stephen Morrow, whose letter had managed to sound expensive and petty at the same time. He sent a letter claiming I was making defamatory accusations during a period of emotional instability and demanded that I cease contacting my parents except through counsel. He also suggested any passport issue was likely due to my own negligence. There it was again, their favorite move. Harm me, then diagnose my reaction. At church the following Sunday, my parents performed Injured Innocence for an audience that had known me since I wore patent leather shoes and Christmas tights. I still went, because disappearing would have made their story easier. St. Mark's in Westerville smelled like old hymnals, coffee, and floor polish. Women hugged me too carefully. Men asked how everything was going in voices that pretended not to know. After service, a woman from my mother's Bible study touched my forearm and said, "Family is more important than pride, sweetheart." I smiled and said, "I agree, which is why false reports are such a serious thing." She actually took a half step back. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. Aunt Evelyn stood near the coat rack with her beige purse looped over one wrist. She watched the whole exchange, then said to no one in particular, "Paperwork has no feelings, that is what makes it useful." Later in the parking lot, she handed me a folded note. Inside she had written 2 dates, one time and one sentence, August 1st, 11:15 a.m. Your mother left lunch early to make a government call from the car. I still have the reservation receipt. That older woman was present at the original wound in the only way that matters in these stories. She was there, she noticed, and she remembered. The second escalation came in September. Because I had informed the university and police that someone had falsely interfered with my travel documents, my father shifted tactics and tried to frighten me into silence with legal theater. Their attorney requested that I retract all statements imputing criminal conduct. Then 2 days later, a county deputy served me at home with notice that my parents were seeking a civil protection order based on alleged harassment. I laughed when I read it, which surprised me. Not because it was funny, because sometimes audacity reaches a point where your nervous system can only answer with disbelief. Their petition described repeated unwanted contact, accusations, and emotional disturbance to the family. My evidence, in other words, had become their victimhood. Patrice looked over the filing and said, "Good. Now they have signed something." She was not happy exactly, but she was alert in a way I came to trust. A false petition creates discoverable statements, dates, claims, contradictions. We filed our response. I submitted every text, every call log, every certified mail receipt, every email from the university, and a short affidavit describing the passport invalidation and resulting financial losses. The hearing was set for October 17th in Franklin County Domestic Relations Court. You would think that by then my family might have grown tired. People who build lies for comfort rarely get tired. They get practiced. Megan texted twice asking whether I would consider dropping everything if mom and dad would apologize for the misunderstanding. I told her there was no misunderstanding to apologize for. There was a false report and a chain of resulting loss. She did not answer for 2 days. Then she asked if I wanted Caleb's preschool artwork he had made for me. Even then, she was trying to reroute the emotional current. I wrote back, I love him, this is separate. She never understood that sentence, but I kept saying it anyway. By mid-September, the financial damage had become painfully concrete. I lost the $1,600 housing deposit. I lost $287 in non-refundable visa and photo processing costs. I lost $342 in flight-related fees and fare difference after canceling and attempting to rebook around a passport timeline that no longer existed. I lost something harder to list in neat columns, which was momentum. When a plan is disrupted by your own mistake, you can absorb that. When it is disrupted by deliberate sabotage, every ordinary task afterwards feels contaminated. I still went to work. I still paid rent. I still answered emails and smiled at patients and sorted referrals by diagnosis code. But there were nights I stood in my kitchen staring at the blue dish towel on the oven handle and thought, they reached all the way into my future and moved it. Alicia never asked me for emotional performance. Once, after a long Friday, she set a takeout container of pad thai on my desk and said, "You forgot to eat lunch again." Another time, she drove me to the courthouse because parking downtown makes me anxious, and she knew I would insist on managing alone if she offered too much. As we sat at a red light on High Street, she said, "You don't have to be pleasant for this to count as dignified." I think some women need to hear that at least once in their lives. By early October, Patrice had secured one important thing. A compliance inquiry from the passport agency confirmed that the August 1st loss report had originated from a mobile number associated with Denise Parker. They would not release the full call audio directly to us yet, but they would provide a representative to testify or submit records if requested in the context of the pending hearing, because the false report was now relevant to the protective order allegations. My mother had gone to the government and used my information to block my travel. Now the government had a file. That is one of the strange comforts of bureaucracy. It remembers what people hope will blur. At this point in the story, let me ask you something. Have you ever had that moment where you realize the person hurting you is not acting out of chaos at all, but out of calm entitlement? That they truly believe your life is available for their editing, because that was the part that stayed with me the longest. Not just the lie, the confidence underneath it. The hearing date drew nearer. Family pressure intensified. Aunt Carol called and told me my father was not sleeping. A deacon from church suggested mediation. Megan sent a message at 1 in the morning saying, "What if this follows Mom forever?" I looked at the glow of my phone in the dark and thought, what if what she did follows me forever? There is a difference between being vindictive and being unwilling to carry someone else's consequences. Women get trained to confuse the two. I was done with that training. The week before the hearing, October 10th through 17th, moved with that strange combination of drag and acceleration that only legal deadlines create. Every day had both too much and not enough in it. Patrice and I met twice to prepare. She liked legal pads and black coffee and did not waste adjectives. We walked through the timeline until I could recite it without looking down. June 12th, admitted. August 1st, false loss report. August 22nd, airline alert and passport invalidation discovered. August 28th, tuition deadline missed. September, attorney letters and civil protection filing. Facts, not feelings. Though the feelings were there, lined up behind my ribs like people waiting in a hallway. The hearing itself was not intended to decide the entire criminal question. That is important. This was my parents trying to obtain a civil protection order to cast me as unstable and threatening, but because their claim rested on the idea that I had irrationally accused them of wrongdoing, the truth of the passport report became central. Their strategy had overreached. They had moved the fight into a room where records matter more than family narratives. That was their mistake. In the days leading up to it, I could feel the story shifting around me in the community. People who had once said there must be some misunderstanding began saying, "Well, I don't know all the details." That is the first retreat of the cowardly. They do not admit they were wrong, they simply back away from certainty. Word had gotten out that attorneys were involved and that there was a government inquiry. Nothing scares casual gossip like paperwork with seals on it. I did not help that spread along. I did not need to. Truth has its own circulation once official people begin using full names. Megan called me on October 13th while I was folding laundry. She sounded exhausted. Caleb had croup. Evan was traveling for work. My mother, she said, was convinced the hearing would be dismissed in 10 minutes and that I would finally be forced to stop. Then Megan started crying again, though less performatively this time, more like someone who had run out of places to put her own shame. She admitted our mother had borrowed her phone on August 1st because hers was acting up at lunch with Aunt Evelyn. Then she corrected herself and said no. Maybe Mom had taken her own phone to the car. She wasn't sure, everything was blurry. It was the first time I heard actual confusion in Megan's voice rather than strategy. Lies do that. They ask everyone nearby to memorize a play they never rehearsed. I asked her one question. Did you know they planned to report my passport lost? She said after a long pause. No. I knew they wanted to stop you. I did not know how far they would go. There are confessions that are almost more painful than outright malice because they reveal the softer accomplices. The people who notice the fuse and say nothing because they assume someone else will put it out. I told her that if she wanted to be helpful, she could tell the truth if asked under oath. She whispered, I don't know if I can do that to them. I said, they already did it to themselves. We ended the call there. Aunt Evelyn came to my apartment the afternoon before the hearing, carrying a rectangular tin of shortbread and an envelope. She wore a camel coat even though the day was unseasonably warm, because some women dress by principle rather than weather. She sat at my kitchen table, looked around at my stacks of tabbed papers, and gave the smallest approving nod. Good, she said. Messy feelings, clean files. Then she slid the envelope toward me. Inside was a photocopy of the restaurant receipt from August 1st lunch. 4 guests. Departure time noted by hand because Aunt Evelyn had asked the server for it after my mother hurried to the parking lot. On the back she had written, Denise left at 11:12, returned at 11:27, said she had to handle a government matter. When I looked up, Aunt Evelyn was watching me steadily. I did not know then what she was doing, she said, but I knew she was doing something she preferred not to explain. I asked her why she had kept it. She gave a little shrug. I worked in public records for 30 years, Lauren. When people say government matter in a strained voice and then come back smiling too hard, I keep receipts. Then she opened the shortbread tin and placed one cookie on a napkin in front of me like a sacrament. There is no revenge story without witnesses. Not really. Not if you want it to land in the body and not just the record. Aunt Evelyn was my witness. She had seen the shape of my family before I was ready to name it. The courthouse on October 17th was colder than it needed to be. Institutional cold air that makes everyone sit straighter. The hallway outside courtroom 4C smelled faintly of burnt coffee and copier toner. My parents arrived with Stephen Morrow 15 minutes early. My mother wore a navy sheath dress and pearl earrings, as if this were a luncheon where she expected to be admired for her poise. My father wore the gray suit he kept for funerals and Christmas Eve services. He gave me one brief look that tried to communicate disappointment from a great moral height. It failed. Megan came too, carrying a large tote bag and looking 10 years older than she had in August. She stood near the vending machines, eyes red-rimmed, and did not come over. Patrice sat beside me with 2 legal pads. My binder and a bottle of water she had already opened because she knew my hands would be cold. Alicia had driven me again and waited in the back row, even though she had no legal role there. That was the thing about her. Presence without intrusion. When I glanced behind me once, she gave me a small nod, and that was enough to keep my breathing even. Some people think support means advice. Sometimes support is simply staying in the room. The judge was a woman in her early 60s with clear glasses and the kind of patience that can turn hard very quickly. My parents' attorney opened by describing them as concerned parents subjected to irrational accusations by an adult daughter under stress over an international move. He emphasized repeated communications, emotional strain, and reputational harm. It was well packaged. He was good at making control sound like concern. Then Patrice stood and in about 4 minutes stripped all the upholstery off that language. She said this case was not about family discomfort. It was about whether my accusations were fabricated or grounded in evidence. She laid out the timeline and the consequence. Invalidated passport, missed educational deadline, financial loss, documented interference. Her voice never rose. I testified first. I spoke carefully because carefulness had become my refuge by then. I described where I kept my passport, who had access to my apartment, how I discovered the invalidation, and what happened to my university deposit and housing. I listed the amounts. $11,870 tuition deadline missed, $1,600 housing deposit lost, $287 in visa-related fees, $342 in flight costs. Numbers do something in rooms where feelings have been overused. They bring furniture back into focus. Stephen Morrow tried to suggest I was prone to overreaction and that my travel plans had always been uncertain. He asked whether I had been stressed. I said yes. He asked whether I had ever discussed fears about moving abroad with my mother. I said of course. He asked whether I was absolutely certain the folder had not simply been misplaced. I said my passport was reported lost on August 1st while I still physically possessed it. A misplaced folder cannot make a false report to the federal government. There was a tiny shift in the room after that. Not dramatic, just a settling. Then came the older woman. Aunt Evelyn took the stand in a cream cardigan and low-heeled shoes, carrying her purse and reading glasses like she had all the time in the world. She gave her name and age in a clear voice. Then she told the court about the August 1st lunch, my mother's departure to handle a government matter, and the prior dinner conversation on August 5th where my mother asked Megan where I kept my important papers. Stephen Morrow tried to soften it by calling her memory impressive, but perhaps interpretive. Aunt Evelyn looked at him over her glasses and said, "Young man, I spent 3 decades documenting people who hoped memory would be enough for them. I prefer receipts." There was a murmur in the room before the judge quieted it. Even my father looked down. Still, my parents held to their script. My mother testified that she had never reported my passport lost and that any concern she had raised about my travel was maternal, not malicious. She said she had been worried about my fragile state. My father said he had advised caution but had no knowledge of any report. Their calmness was almost impressive if you did not know what it cost everyone around them. This is what I mean by entitlement. They were willing to stand in a courtroom and build a whole daughter-shaped shadow version of me because they thought their social credibility would outrank my evidence. Patrice then called the outsider who did not know she was delivering a verdict. Her name was Marianne Doyle, a compliance specialist from the passport agency. She was in her late 50s, wore a charcoal blazer, and had the neutral, slightly tired air of a woman who spends her workdays inside systems too large for ego. She did not come there to save me. She came because a subpoena and a federal file required her to explain administrative facts. That is exactly why it worked. She had no emotional stake, no family history, no need to persuade anyone of anything beyond the record. Marianne testified that the passport associated with my full name and date of birth had been reported lost by phone on August 1st at 11:16 a.m. Eastern Time. She stated that such a report immediately invalidates the passport in the system. She confirmed that the caller provided identifying details including my date of birth, current address, and, crucially, the location where the passport was supposedly last seen. Patrice asked her to read that part from the file. Marianne looked down and said, "Caller stated passport was usually kept in top drawer of white bedroom dresser." My breath caught so sharply it hurt. That detail mattered because I had never shared it with the agency. No airline had it, no school had it, no government form asked where inside my bedroom I stored my document. It was domestic knowledge, intimate and stupidly specific. The kind of detail only someone inside my life would think was safe to use because they did not realize how revealing it was. Then Patrice asked the second question. Was the originating phone number attached to the report identified in the compliance review? Marianne said yes. She read the last 4 digits. They were my mother's, Denise Parker's cell phone. My mother made a sound then, not a word, not exactly, more like the body's brief refusal to keep performing. My father stopped moving entirely. There it was. The silence I had imagined so many nights. Not thunder, not confession, just the collapse of narrative under ordinary administrative testimony. Stephen Morrow objected to something procedural, but his voice had changed. He knew. Everyone knew. The judge asked Marianne one more question. Had there been any indication that the actual passport holder, me, had personally made or authorized the report? Marianne answered, "No, Your Honor. In fact, our office later received direct contact from Miss Parker disputing the report and indicating the passport had not been lost when the call was made." Then she closed the file. She did not dramatize it. She did not have to. Bureaucratic women are some of the most devastating witnesses on earth. The judge denied my parents' petition from the bench. She stated that the evidence did not support a finding of harassment by me and instead raised serious concerns regarding false reporting and misuse of government processes by the petitioners. She referred the matter for further review and warned all parties that retaliatory filings would not be tolerated. My father looked as if someone had removed the floor and politely asked him to continue standing. My mother kept her eyes fixed on one point of the counsel table. Megan put her hand over her mouth and stared at the wood grain. Afterward, in the hallway, no one rushed dramatically toward anyone. Real life rarely gives you those neat confrontations. Patrice gathered papers. Alicia touched my shoulder once. Aunt Evelyn adjusted her purse strap. My parents spoke in low, urgent tones with their attorney. Then, because human beings are occasionally more honest when their scripts fail, Megan came over and said, very quietly, "I should have told you the first day." It was the truest sentence she had said in months. I nodded. There was nothing else to offer. By that evening, the story had started traveling on its own. I did not call anyone. I did not post online. But court records are not sealed by family embarrassment, and church parking lots are more efficient than social media. By Wednesday morning, 2 women from St. Mark's who had avoided me for weeks sent messages saying they were praying for me. One added, "I had no idea. That sentence never comforts me." People usually have enough idea. They just prefer not to know. The reveal did not repair the practical damage overnight. That matters. I know some stories tie everything into a perfect bow the minute truth enters the room. My housing deposit did not reappear because a compliance specialist read numbers off a page. My fall semester in Edinburgh did not unmiss itself. The humiliation, though, shifted location. It was no longer sitting on my chest. It moved back where it belonged. In the weeks after the hearing, consequences began to unfold without my choreography. The passport agency's referral triggered further inquiry. Because the loss report had led to federal administrative action, and because my parents had then attempted to leverage a civil protection order around the resulting dispute, their lawyer suddenly got much quieter. Stephen Morrow, who had sounded so polished in his letters, sent Patrice a subdued note indicating his clients would have no further direct contact with me and were evaluating their position. I appreciated the phrasing. Evaluating their position meant discovering the ground was not load-bearing. At church, my parents' standing changed in the subtle, devastating way social reputations often do. No one held a public tribunal. No one needed to. People simply stopped seeking them out with the same warmth. Invitations thinned. Bible study leadership was reshuffled for the winter term. My mother was not asked to coordinate the women's luncheon she usually ran every November. My father, who had once loved being consulted on facilities issues because he considered himself practical, found that others had already volunteered. Community consequence without my involvement is a very particular thing. It is not loud, it is a draft under the door. Megan texted more often after the hearing, but the tone had changed. Less persuasion, more fragments of reality leaking through. She wrote that Mom had not stopped crying for 2 days. Then later that Mom was furious and blaming everyone else. Then later still that Dad had said almost nothing since court except, "I didn't think it would go that far." That sentence reached me strangely. Of course he hadn't. Men like my father rarely believe consequences will remain attached to their choices all the way to the end. They think systems are for other people. There was one moment with my mother that remains fixed in me because of how small it was. About 3 weeks after the hearing, I received a padded envelope by certified mail. Inside was my Navy document folder. No note, no apology, just the folder, slightly bent at one corner, with my birth certificate, old passport copy, social security card, and vaccination record inside. The actual invalidated passport was there too, tucked into the back sleeve as if it had simply wandered home. Patrice advised me to preserve the package and envelope because return itself can be evidence, so I photographed the label, the postmark, the contents, and the way the top tab had a faint smear of my mother's coral lipstick on one edge. That stain made me angrier than anything. Such an ordinary little mark, casual, domestic. The violence of entitlement often looks like that. I did not contact her about the folder. I added the photographs to the binder and gave the original package to Patrice. By then, my actions no longer required emotional accompaniment. There is a freedom in that. Not peace exactly, but clean movement. Professionally, I had to decide what to do with the gap left by Edinburgh. For a week after the hearing, I could not think beyond sleeping and answering necessary emails. Then one Friday, Alicia came into my cubicle holding a printout from a public health institute in Ann Arbor that offered a one-year research fellowship beginning in January. She set it down and said, "This isn't the same thing, but it is in the same direction." I looked at the page: data analysis, community health policy, tuition support, strong mentoring. My first reaction was grief that it was not Scotland. My second was recognition. Life was still there. Bent, not gone. I applied because Alicia printed the form and because Patrice, when I mentioned it in passing, said, "A disrupted path is not a dead one." Aunt Evelyn said, "Good. Stay in motion." That is one lesson older women know better than anyone. Stillness can become somebody else's victory if you let it. In December, I interviewed with the Institute over Zoom from my apartment, sitting in front of the least chaotic bookshelf I own. I wore a soft blue sweater and the small silver earrings Alicia had given me for my birthday 2 years before. The interview panel asked thoughtful questions. No one there knew the family mess behind my transcript or my suddenly altered plans. They only knew my work, my writing sample, and the care with which I spoke about access gaps in preventive health systems. There was something healing about being evaluated on the right facts. I got the fellowship 3 days before Christmas, full tuition remission for the affiliated certificate, a living stipend, and project work under a researcher whose papers I had already cited twice. When the email arrived, I sat at my kitchen table with cold coffee and the early winter light, turning everything pale gold, and I did not cry this time. I breathed. Then I forwarded it to Alicia and Aunt Evelyn before I told anyone else. Alicia replied, "Knew it." Aunt Evelyn replied, "Good. Forward is a direction." I still have both messages. My parents did try one final small escalation. On December 27th, after learning through family channels that I had accepted the fellowship in Michigan, my father left a voicemail from an unknown number. His voice was controlled in that dangerous way, each word polished smooth. He said he hoped I was finished punishing the family, and that perhaps once I calmed down we could speak like adults. I saved the voicemail and sent it to Patrice. She sent a brief notice to their attorney reminding him of the no contact expectation. There was no reply. Sometimes a legal reminder is the cleanest translation available. The secondary villain in this story was Megan, and she did have one genuine reckoning. In January, 1 week before I moved to Ann Arbor, she asked if she could meet me for coffee somewhere public. We met at a Panera off Polaris because it was neutral and because I had no appetite for atmosphere. She looked tired, thinner than usual, and older around the eyes. After a minute of stirring a drink she did not touch, she said, "I keep replaying that lunch. Mom asking where you kept your papers, me answering. I knew she was trying to stop you. I told myself she just wanted one more chance to talk you out of it. I was a coward." Then she said, very quietly, "I liked being the one who stayed. It made me safe." That was the most honest thing she ever gave me. Not because it fixed anything, because it named the economy of our family. Compliance bought comfort. Distance cost you. I told her I believed she was sorry. I also told her I did not trust her. Both were true. She cried again, but softly, with no audience this time. I did not rescue her from it. There is a kind of mercy in letting people feel the full shape of what they chose. We finished our coffee in relative silence. When we stood to leave, she asked whether things would ever be normal. I said, they were never normal. They were just familiar. She nodded like someone receiving a diagnosis. By February, the fellowship had started, and I had moved into a small apartment in Ann Arbor, with radiators that clicked at night and windows that fogged in the morning. My life became modest and real again. Bus schedules, research meetings, grocery trips to Trader Joe's where college students clogged the freezer aisle, long walks in a wool coat near the Huron River when I needed to think. Chosen routines are an underrated form of recovery. They return your body to you in increments. Word about my parents continued to travel in concentric circles I did not manage. My Aunt Carol stopped trying to mediate and began speaking in cautious, embarrassed tones if she called at all. A deacon's wife who had once advised me to value family over pride sent a handwritten note saying she had been thinking about me and hoped I was well. She did not apologize directly. People rarely do. They circle remorse like it is a hot stove. That is fine. I was not waiting there anymore. In March, Aunt Evelyn took the train up to visit me for a Saturday. We had lunch at a little place on Main Street where the soup came in heavy white bowls and the waitress called everyone honey. Aunt Evelyn wore a sage green scarf and inspected the check before I could reach for it. Absolutely not, she said. I invited you. We walked afterward through a bookstore where she bought a slim volume of essays and told me which local judge had once tried to flirt with her in 1987 while filing late campaign finance forms. I laughed so hard I had to stop walking. There it was, ordinary joy. Not triumphant music, not a grand reconciliation, just a woman who had stood beside me and was still there. I should say this plainly because some stories skip it. Full forgiveness has not arrived yet. I do not know if it will. I am no longer actively angry every day, which is different. Some mornings I can think of my parents only as two aging people who chose control over love and are now living in the smaller world that choice creates. Other days I remember the airline text at 5:14 in the morning and feel something cold move through me. Healing is not a staircase, it is weather. What I do have is clarity. I changed every emergency contact on every file. I updated every password and removed every family member from every document, account, and authorization list. I wrote a will which feels absurd at 25 until your own parents teach you the value of named boundaries. I keep my passport in a locked fireproof box now, not because I live in fear, but because trust should be earned by people who understand what it costs. My parents and I are no contact. That was not a dramatic proclamation. It was a series of clean decisions repeated consistently. When cards arrived without return addresses, I gave them to Patrice unopened if they seemed relevant, or dropped them in a drawer if they were plainly sentimental bait. When distant relatives tried to engineer accidental encounters, I declined. I do not attend St. Mark's when I visit Columbus. I found another church in Ann Arbor where no one knows my family history and no one assumes access to my private life is a sign of love. The thing I did not expect was how many women, once they heard some version of what happened, quietly told me smaller stories of their own. A mother opening mail, a father forging a signature on a student loan deferment, a sister borrowing tax information, an aunt who kept inheritance papers a little too close. Family harm is often dressed in concern and committed in daylight. That is why people doubt themselves. It does not always look cinematic. Sometimes it looks like a woman using your spare key and then calling it love. It has been a year and a half now since the Sunday lunch where my father said they had saved me from embarrassing myself. I can still see the table, the sweating glasses, the sliced tomatoes with basil my aunt had arranged in a spiral on a white platter. The way nobody moved at first because cruelty in polite settings makes people hold very still, hoping someone else will define the moment. Back then, I thought the worst part was being humiliated publicly while my future sat in pieces. I was wrong. The worst part was understanding that my parents had mistaken access for ownership. They thought because they had raised me, they retained editing rights. They do not. This spring, I finished the fellowship certificate with distinction. My research supervisor, Dr. Nisha Banerjee, encouraged me to apply for a doctoral track if I wanted one later. But for now, I accepted a policy analyst position with a nonprofit healthcare network in Detroit. I commute twice a week and work remotely the rest. My apartment in Ann Arbor is still small, but now the windowsill holds herbs I keep forgetting to water, and somehow they survive anyway. There is a wool throw on the couch Alicia mailed me after my first winter here. There is a ceramic bowl on the counter Aunt Evelyn gave me for my birthday, the kind with a blue glazed rim and tiny imperfections that prove a hand made it. These are the things that make a life. Not huge declarations, repeated care. Alicia visited in June. We sat on my tiny balcony with takeout salads balanced on our knees while traffic moved softly below, and someone nearby practiced trumpet badly enough to be charming. She looked around at my mismatched chairs and said, You built this fast. I knew what she meant, not the furniture, the life. I told her it did not feel fast when I was inside it. She smiled and said, "It never does." Then she handed me a folder with the dry cleaner receipt I had accidentally left in her car 3 months earlier, because she is that kind of person, quiet, steady, returning what belongs to you. Aunt Evelyn still calls every other Sunday around 4, as if she has appointed herself my Eastern Standard Time conscience. Last month she said, "You sound rested," in the tone one might use to note favorable weather patterns. Then she told me Denise had resigned from one of her volunteer committees after all that unpleasantness, and that your Uncle Ray now refers to anything suspiciously vague as a government matter to mixed family amusement. I laughed into the phone, really laughed, and Aunt Evelyn let herself laugh too. A low, surprised sound like a drawer opening. That is another community consequence I never orchestrated. They became a cautionary tale in their own circles. Not a dramatic downfall, just a change in how people say their names. Megan and I maintain a thin, careful line of contact, mostly because of Caleb, who sends me voice notes about dinosaurs, and once informed me with grave sincerity that his class hamster had boundary issues. Children stumble into truth in wonderful ways. Megan has improved in the sense that she no longer asks me to absorb what she cannot bear to face. She has started setting limits with our parents, though from what I hear, she still does it apologetically. I do not judge the pace of another woman's unlearning, but I do keep my distance from it. Her reckoning is her work. I have my own. As for my parents, the last thing I heard directly came through Patrice 6 months ago. Their attorney relayed an offer to reimburse specific documented losses if I would sign a mutual non-disparagement agreement and acknowledge that the matter arose from family miscommunication and concern. I stared at that phrase for a long time. Family miscommunication and concern. Such elegant little brooms they tried to use. Patrice called and asked what I wanted to do. I told her I would accept reimbursement only if the written language accurately reflected a false loss report and resulting financial harm. The offer disappeared. Of course it did. They wanted silence more than accountability. That tells you everything. I did eventually recover part of the financial loss through administrative channels and one narrow insurance benefit tied to my canceled flight. Though not all of it, money matters, and I tracked every dollar. But the larger recovery was jurisdictional. My life moved back under my own authority. That sounds simple. It is not. Women raised in controlling families spend years treating independence like a request form. You learn to ask permission with your shoulders, your voice, your plans. Then one day, paperwork, of all things, teaches you the truth. Authority is not granted by the people most offended when you use it. There are still certain sounds that catch me: a notification buzzing before dawn, certified mail sliding through a slot, the phrase "we are concerned" in a too careful voice. But fear no longer runs the house. It visits, it leaves. I have locks, I have records. I have people who show up and do not ask me to shrink for their comfort. A few weeks ago, on a Thursday evening in early September, I had Alicia on speaker while I chopped cucumbers for a salad, and Aunt Evelyn was due to arrive the next day by train for a long weekend. The apartment smelled like basil and dish soap. Rain tapped against the screen door. My friend Marisol from the office texted asking if I wanted to come by for board games Saturday night, and Caleb had sent me a picture of a lopsided Lego tower. He insisted was Scotland but better. I stood there in my kitchen with wet hands and a cheap knife, and realized how ordinary the moment was. No audience, no verdict, just a life inhabited by people who chose to be there. That, for me, is the ending. Not forgiveness neatly wrapped, not my parents transformed into good people by consequences. They have not become people I can trust. I do not expect that to change. Some absences are healthy, some distances are earned. I can say all of that now without shaking. If you are listening to this, and you are in the part where the lies are still louder than the records, I want to leave you with what Aunt Evelyn told me in my kitchen the day before court. She had one hand on her purse and one hand on the shortbread tin, and she said it like she was commenting on the weather. Messy feelings, clean files. It sounded almost funny at the time, but she was right. You do not have to become hard to become exact. You do not have to scream to be believed eventually. You do not have to personally deliver anyone's downfall. Sometimes all you have to do is keep your notes, tell the truth, and stay in the room long enough for the right outsider to read from the file. I still have the white binder on a shelf in my office closet, not because I take it down often, because it reminds me what happened when I stopped translating harm into nicer words. It reminds me that a woman in a charcoal blazer who did not know me from anyone could walk into a courtroom, read one line about a white dresser drawer, and undo months of manipulation without ever meaning to perform justice. It reminds me that systems can fail us and still occasionally leave a paper trail sturdy enough to cross back over. Tonight, after I finish this, I am making roasted potatoes and salmon because Aunt Evelyn likes dinner at 6 sharp, and Alicia is driving up after work to stay the night. Marisol is bringing sparkling water and a pie she claims she did not burn this time. My dining table is small, so someone will have to use the folding chair I keep in the hall closet. There will be too many dishes in the sink, and someone will misplace the serving spoon, and Aunt Evelyn will say, "A kitchen without disorder is a museum," and Alicia will quietly start stacking plates while pretending she is not helping. Caleb will probably call right as we sit down to announce another emergency involving a dinosaur. It will be ordinary, it will be warm, it will be chosen. And for now, that is more.